Hi everyone, my name is Laura Stevens and I'm here to talk to you about anxiety. These are uncertain times we're living through, and this webinar is part one of a two-part series on anxiety. In this first part, I'll be talking about anxiety in general, typical developmental worries and fears, what anxiety looks and feels like, and what's going on in the brain and in the body. In part two of the webinar, I'll provide strategies you can use to help your child or teen cope with worries and anxiety, and a variety of resources and places to turn for more information and support. Fear is an emotion that we feel when we're presented with something scary or dangerous in the moment, while anxiety tends to jump ahead into the future and results in a lot of uncertainty and what-ifs. We often try to avoid or get rid of uncomfortable emotions in ourselves, and maybe even more so in our children. Life is busy and we might quickly tell our kids that they're okay and everything will be okay. We try to distract them from what they're feeling. Sometimes we do everything we can to hurry them through those emotions so that they and we can feel better, because sitting with fear and uncertainty is uncomfortable and upsetting. If we do that though, what they're learning is that those feelings are scary and we need to avoid them. Instead, let's think about fear and anxiety as emotions that give us information, just like any other emotion. We need fear and anxiety to survive and thrive, and it's important to teach our children that although sometimes uncomfortable, these emotions are normal and a part of life. They protect us from harmful or dangerous situations, enhance our performance, and they can even motivate us. A lot of research has been done in child development to determine common fears and worries at different developmental stages. They are a normal part of growing up, and most kids will cycle through a variety of fears and worries at some point, and the intensity of the fears will vary from child to child. School-age children and adolescents, in addition to worrying about things like getting hurt, school performance, and social relationships, also commonly worry about natural disasters and events and the health of themselves and others. Some of you may be wondering, at what point is your child's anxiety outside of the range of typical worries? Some things to look out for are whether your child's worry is out of proportion to the actual situation, if your child is often distressed, if they are avoiding things that they typically would enjoy doing, and most importantly, if these symptoms become chronic and interfere with daily living and the ability to function. To meet criteria for a diagnosis of anxiety, medical professionals typically look for a persistent and disabling pattern that lasts longer than 6 months. There are different types of anxiety disorders, and if you have serious concerns for your child, more information and assessment is likely required. Next steps and resources are covered in part 2 of the webinar. Anxiety can look like many different things. Depending on your child's age, it can present as physical complaints, anger, defiance, avoidance, sleep difficulties, difficulties with self-regulation, so the ability to manage one's behavior, emotions, and thoughts, and of course your more typical what-if questions and seeking reassurance. Anxiety manifests itself in 3 main ways. The first way is through our thoughts. Now, this is very tricky during this time of COVID-19, as we are inundated with news about the virus and worries that people have. It's normal to have worries about our masks protecting us and whether someone we love will get sick. When anxiety becomes concerning, as I mentioned before, is when these worries become persistent and interfere with daily functioning. Add to this the idea of negative bias, which means that our brains tend to focus on the negatives, so we really have to work hard, especially these days, to see the positives and be optimistic. The second way that anxiety shows up is in physical or body symptoms. When we feel anxious, our sympathetic nervous system is activated, and we're likely to engage by fighting, fleeing, or freezing. These are adaptive behaviors that are there to protect us from danger. However, when someone is suffering from anxiety, they experience these symptoms like heart racing, sweating, stomach aches in response to fears or worries that don't require that level of response. The third way that anxiety presents itself is through our behavior. One of the most challenging behaviors we see in children with anxiety is avoidance. When we avoid our fears and worries, we feel relief, and that reinforcing feeling makes it more likely that we'll avoid the same situation in the future. So an important strategy to managing anxiety is to avoid avoiding, and we'll get to that later. What causes and maintains anxiety? We know that anxiety tends to run in families, suggesting a genetic component. Connected to this is modeling, where children learn fearful responses or avoidance from others they know. We also know that negative or anxious thoughts keep anxiety going. Individuals with anxiety try to avoid the anxiety-provoking situation at all costs. Sometimes this can be really obvious avoidance, like school refusal, refusing to go to a birthday party, and sometimes it's more subtle avoidance, like working really hard on homework or at school so they don't make any mistakes or get in trouble. Certain stressors may lead to the development of anxiety, and other stressors can worsen or trigger pre-existing anxiety. It's most likely an interaction of some or all of these factors that leads to and maintains anxiety in children. In the 1960s, the concept of the triune brain was developed by an American neuroscientist. This model of the brain suggests that the brain is organized into 3 regions based on how we've evolved. The first, most primitive region, what is sometimes called the reptile brain, is the basal ganglia and in charge of primal or survival instincts. The second region is the limbic system. This is the part of the brain on the right side of the picture that includes the amygdala, and when we're presented with an anxiety-provoking thought or a situation, it becomes activated. As this happens, our emotions and memory are also activated, and the hormone cortisol is released into our system. The prefrontal cortex, which is the last part of the brain to mature, is where thinking, logic, and problem-solving happen. When all is running smoothly, we are able to experience emotions and events, and our brain connects to the problem-solving and logic area as well. Unfortunately, when our system is flooded with cortisol, the bridge between our reptile brain and limbic system to our thinking brain is washed out, and it's really hard to access our strategies and figure out how to respond. This is often why when our kids are struggling and we know that they know what to do, for example, take deep breaths, go for a walk, take a break, when we suggest that they use their strategies or calm down, they're unable to do so without direct guidance or support. Providing this guidance in that moment is called co-regulation. It's a way to provide that bridge for our kids, and we'll talk more about that in the strategies section in part 2 of the webinar. It's really common for kids to complain of stomach aches when they're experiencing anxiety, and a lot of research has been done on the brain-gut connection. I'm not going to delve too deep into this, but know that when cortisol is increased in the body, it also triggers an increase in stomach acid, which leads to stomach pain. Conversely, there's also research to suggest that maintaining a healthy gut with probiotics, so for example, things like fermented food like yogurt, pickles, kombucha, kimchi, can also improve mental health and well-being. This is the end of part 1, Understanding Anxiety. If you would like more information about specific strategies and daily practices you can do with your child to promote emotional well-being, please tune in to part 2, How Parents and Caregivers Can Help Children and Teens with Anxiety. Thank you for taking the time to listen today. I wish you a safe and healthy rest of the summer and return to school.